Greetings, gentle readers. It's October 22nd, 2025. Here today from A Study with Ross Finlayson is Logos 2000, 21st Century Foundations. As mentioned previously, the idea today is this series Logos 2000 is reaching about 52 episodes, which is being about 50 hours a lecture is kind of considered enough and sufficient. The idea today is take a look at the Bible, the Santa Biblia, the Holy Bible, the liturgy, it's the central part of the liturgy of Christianity, the religion, as that's many religions. That Christianity has as a central figure Jesus the Christ, of the representation of man, and the notion of the deity's gift of a man to represent the good and the bad in man, and to represent the greatest, and also the suffering that arrives at being for the angst and the catharsis of man. So then with regards to that, there'll just be some looking to the Bible or a copy of the Bible. There are many editions and revisions of the Bible, and I have maybe a half a dozen or a dozen Bibles and Psalms. I have a copy of the Quran. Someone once gave me a copy of the Torah for some perceived service to them. And something like the Sufi, there's the structural depths of Indian thought, for example, as from P.T. Raju, reflecting on something like Mahayana Buddhism then. And then for Zen Buddhism, for the Godai, the philosophy of the ninja, to such notions as, like the Celts or Picts or the pagans, or various notions of animism and universalism, the agnostics, the gnostics, atheists. These are aspects of different ideas of religious tradition and religions, that even atheism is sort of what people bind themselves to as the religion. And that today you can point of something like when they don't have otherwise, a study of world philosophy or world religion, or even really much of a knowledge that there is such a thing. Without a language of the thing, there can't be much of a knowledge of the thing. Yet as well has that the ineffable, as it may be, the unknowable, the unnameable, is part of the aspects of here, the supreme and the omni, the supernatural, as Duns Scotus, one of the doctors of the Catholic, as was to be the universal Christian church, has, and it's part of also our canon of reason after the medieval philosophers, as from the Logos 2000, Logos 1200 to 1400 bit here some time ago. That the Bible is both the Old Testament and the New Testament. So the Old Testament is generally held up as the religion of the Jews before the time of Christ, and then the books therein are part of that history then for things like the Torah and the rabbinical, where that started only actually about 200 years after 0 AD, Anno Domini we may put it, or a common era, it's often written today, vis-a-vis before 0 AD in our chronology, how the calendric arrives at a timekeeping apparatus day over day and year over year. That the Mosaical then is the first idea of the laws of Moses, and that Moses went to the mountain, and the higher power gave him these two slates of the Ten Commandments, and resultingly he arrived at laws after these various commands of the, how one might say, Genesis, with regards to the first commands, with regards to knowledge and wisdom and these kinds of things. The stories of these books, of these liturgies, that then the Old Testament has these books as they're usually given, and the New Testament then has these books as they're usually given. I'll say, for example, my favorite is probably Ecclesiastes. It's the good book and that kind of thing. Then with regards to after the Mosaical, then there were the teachings of Jesus. And so that thusly then that's just the aspect of logos being that when Jesus is introduced into the Bible, it's as logos. And so then logos as the notion of the logic and the word of the reason and the discourse, the logos discourse, is that he's introduced as the word. And so it's a singular thing and it's a proper thing in that setting. And then that's then so follow here they'll just be considered kind of for its technical import and its techno-analytic import to the philosophy and logic. Why the Bible, to begin as a philosophical work of an authoritative sort, starts with addressing the fundamental question of metaphysics. Why is there something rather than nothing? How can that be? What for all this question words about nothing and being, and without regards to getting to something like Hegel's Wissenschaft or Logik and being and nothing and answering the fundamental question of metaphysics for that our logic arrives at this sort of perfection that is given is an idea of an origin story. The notion of the liturgical, which means the holy, vis-a-vis like the literary and the liturgical, that in the usual dogma, it's considered more than merely stories and books, yet it is, as of stories and books, the Bible, that it begins with explaining that, well, there was nothing and then there was space and time. So here that's framed that there's nothing and then there's geometry and a mathematical universe. And then with the book of John, as it begins to introduce there was nothing, it starts all over again. There was nothing, and then there was the Word. So here that's related in terms of the Zeno theory, whether we begin in the middle, as with words, or whether it has a beginning and an end, the alpha and omega and all that kind of bit, as from space and time. Those two things, as from this sort of tradition, make it so as an authoritative sort of technical work philosophically, then it addresses both of these necessary notions that today also in our technical philosophy we'd keep as one being about space, time, and geometry, and then the other one being, say, kind of about algebra and words and these kinds of things, so that then it can be arrived at that these books and traditions, and they're included, for example, in the Quranic, and they're from the previous traditions like the Zoroastrian and Mithraic, or for something like the Epic of Gilgamesh and like the story of the flood and these kinds of things with regards to the Atlantean and the Bronze Age and the prehistorical, that at some point this was the only available text to indicate an entire history and a philosophical treatise for everything. It was the only book available for a long, long time for many, many people, and it's still the most printed work in the world. So then the ideas here that I considered to address include those. And then with regards to, before getting into some readings in my usual course, just kind of random readings, and then extracting from that the idea, the inspiration to so follow. Then the ideas of about the world religions, and from the time of Jesus Christ or 0 AD, and with regards to Judas and the Israelites and the Essenes and these kinds of things, for example, having a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls and also in relation to other things that are considered books of the Bible, yet are or aren't usually included in the usual accounts. And with regards to other notions of philosophies or religions, as they may be, that would intend to extend this and their attachment of their liturgies, that's considered a little bit left out. That's kind of just part of the surrounds of the written word, and then the idea of that being intersubjective, and as for matters of definition and language, it's great. So the Bible is held up here as being for this the dialetheic for aletheia, the Greek word for wisdom, say, discovery of wisdom. Paraconsistent, meaning it's not contradictory, it's not paradoxical, and dually self-infraconsistent, meaning furthermore it's whole and consistent for a sort of dual monism. So beyond something like the being and nothing, the fundamental question of metaphysics and the dually self-infraconsistent, paraconsistent dialetheic element, the beginning of things, the proto-elements of things. That being, as mentioned, for something like the Hegel's Wissenschaft or Logik, the science of logic, and the what was the idea of being and nothing. Then other inspirations are taken, for example, from Anantha. That Anantha is from prehistory. It's the wisdom snake. So it's like a 100 or 1,000 headed snake, but it's got all the wisdom in the world. And then so the notions of the circle and infinity and the spiral and as a symbol of mathematics, and that relating to things like Thoth and some of the other religions since prehistory. That's for mathematics and the infinity and continuity as well, mathematics. And then there's, with regards to things like Hermes Trismegistus and Thoth and those sorts of attachments to not just technical knowledge, but mystical knowledge, that's pretty much left out, but in reference that it's still part of the theory. Then there's Zeno's arguments. So Zeno's arguments are for mathematics, continuity, infinity, and motion. The classical expositions of the superclassical, with Plato's ideals and Zeno's thought experiments that must be worked to have these kinds of thoughts. That's considered part of this oral canon, with sort of the Bible for the fundamental question of metaphysics, and it is a proper example, and because of its presence. And then Zeno's classical expositions of the superclassical, which are arrived, it usually is given before the times of these works. Then for something like Anantha and the mathematics of a continuum, the existence of a continuum, is kind of like after the being and nothing is like, well, all the points and spaces in the middle, and then for Euclid's geometry to arrive then as the enduring example, the second most printed book in the world, if it's a textbook, it's the Euclid's Elements, the second most printed book in the world. Then the Vedas, as after the Rig Veda and the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas have much of these ideas of the perspective and projection, also kind of super classical reasoning, or at least objective reasoning. And so these are held up. And then with regards to things like the Dao De Ching or something, in the Eightfold Way, that those also represent other ways of looking at things, these all being important technical works. And then for something like the Godai, for example, as a diagram of that, kind of an inward pointing version of that. These make for them that among technical works, it's not necessarily to bring them in to establish otherwise a philosophy, but then relating it to the history and the canon and the dogma and the doctrine can make it so that then at least the perfection of reason can stay so with all the different religions that don't otherwise absolutely just discount it. And for something like the medieval philosophers, and then for the time of Galileo, the Reformation, according to that tradition, and then also has that's been the way of things for 500 years at least, or more. And so when trying to relay that, then it can be so. And it can be so for everybody. And so in this manner, at the same time, the supernatural in matters of belief and faith, and whether there's intercession, that's a different kind of thing, and not necessarily to be attributed to reason as otherwise to experience, say. That there's also as well for the things like transubstantiation that can be seen as a metaphorical yet true act with regards to the being able to come to terms with bridging the divide otherwise between acceptance and submission, that they can be accommodated in a usual sort of sense. Am I a Christian? Yes. Am I a Buddhist? Yes. The idea being that the attachments and the voluntary submission to these things can have also is like, well, I kind of pick what I think Christianity is according to my interpretation, and I believe that's okay, and similarly with like the Buddha, and I think that's good, and these kinds of things. So I was baptized Catholic in the United States, and I was an altar boy or an acolyte in the Episcopalian Church. I light the candles. I put them out. I help with the service. And they have communion, which is this idea that according to a notion of meditation and prayer, that the mental apparatus and faculty can reach to being in a state where it is touching a higher power and these kinds of things. So that was probably my first job outside of the home. Then later I was like a paper boy or something like that. To be a 12-year-old, the only way you could get work outside the home was to deliver the newspapers. So that was, I guess you could call that the gig economy. But it's not so much reflected on then here with regards to matters of religion and belief. For example, being an agnostic, meaning I don't really know the supernatural. And according to my theory of science, it's like that's the perfectly rational philosophy. And it's held up for things like Copleston and Russell on the debate on God that they have there. That's among these things that help gets to then the great divide between logicist positivism as a scientism and idealism is that there's so much attributed both these ways, and then for the dialectic, it's just as how one might say betrayed by those who make their isms, their ideologies, to so follow as those who would say betray the word proper or something like that. In the previous discussions, then there's as mentioned, kind of a reticence and a hesitance to address how people should think about these matters, except insofar as that it's possible and one may. And then for matters of belief, then it's also associated with a voluntary submission to an ontological commitment, as with regards to the ontological status of an ontological idea, the being of an idea, as with regards to the teleology, the purpose of an idea. That teleology and ontology are two way different things. They're both addressed here as necessary for each other. The teleology is like this mirror silver thread of time and these kinds of things. And the ontology is all the data and matters of experience and sense. That those are put together, the idealistic tradition, the analytical tradition, for a perfection that is on its own accords good. And so, as mentioned, it's there's not much otherwise here, a declaration of judgment with regards otherwise to how people think or believe or that kind of thing, except as with regards to that there is an inner objective truth, and it's also as kind of super to us. So that's just usual. So what I have then is I'll have a copy of the Bible, and so this is just a one you can find like anywhere else. A child, my uncle say, when he is 7 years old or so, his grandparents sent him a Bible. And so I just figure it's as good as any other to take a look at it. So it's leather bound with a little slip cover, and then it's got his name engraved on the front. See, it just says revised. Revised. And it says here, okay, let's take a look at this, what this says on the cover. The Revised Standard Version. So, with regards to the various printings and editions and revisions and the translations of the words in the Bible, because in their original languages, they're written in various languages. And, for example, Aramaic or Hebrew or Greek, that the New Testament is generally considered was written in Greek. And then that this is of a time and place, so 50 years ago, 70 years ago. Still in pretty good shape. And so then there's two excerpts to read. So the books are just named. They're always pretty much in the same order. And then every single paragraph has got a number. And so every section's got a number and every paragraph has a number. So it's always kind of got to look up at these things. So the Holy Bible, containing the Old and New Testaments, translated out of the original tongues, with the former translations diligently compared and revised, conformable to the edition of 1611, commonly known as the Authorized or King James Version. Cleveland and New York, the World Publishing Company. So, looking first to look at page 81 here. Let's see if I can find it. So here's Genesis, and here's the New Testament. It is after Malachi. And so here's Mark and Luke. John say. What he says is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. So kind of when we were talking about Heidegger, and so Heidegger by this time had abandoned any use of the word God. And I would too, usually. It's considered a matter of respect to just not use the deity in vain, it's sometimes put. So hubris and humility is necessary because otherwise that would just be considered bad. And then with regard to things like the tetragrammaton or the gematria and the names of the deity. That Heidegger relates the word God to being and kind of the proper and singular term of existence. And so it's another way to look at this in a technical sense is saying that this is all part of existence and it's a singular and enduring and eternal kind of thing. Because it's supreme and the omni without regards to notions like influence and intercession, but with regards to the proviso, the gift of these things. That is kind of like so that this just kind of sets that out as like so. All things were made by this, and without this was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. And then he talks about John. So if that was Jesus, then it says there was a man sent from God whose name was John. The same came for a witness to bear witness of the light, that all men through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. So the light of reason, the light of discourse, the light of having a comprehension of the word, and that words are part of this greater word. So it's a book, there's books in it, it's in a book, there's 3 books at least, it's a book and a book and a book. The idea of this sort of attachment of an approach to the notion of language and the word in the original Greek, that being logos. And so also this fuller context, translated here as the word. So then this just gets into like John bearing witness, or the disciples of Christ. They kind of each have out with like after the baptism and this and that, and these kinds of things. And then it gets into Nathaniel and stuff like that. So that's just kind of beyond that otherwise would be. So otherwise, for this just brief parable and statement of the beginning, then that is an indication that its subjectivity is kind of described. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light, for reflecting on John. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth, full of truth. So that's just kind of to reflect on then about in the middle of this work is that's the beginning of things. Kind of like when we were looking at Descartes in the Meditations the other day, about cogito ergo sum, it's just kind of in passing in the middle. Or reading from Kant when he talks about the sublime, he's like, well, besides that I've reduced it to this, my matters of sense and judgment, there is something greater. It's got to still be there. The sublime is just kind of a footnote in the middle. For something like Duns Scotus and like the infinite and the actual infinite and the entire canon and all this kind of discourse, it's just kind of sitting there in the middle, left because it's kind of promontory. We're here, that's more of like the mountain itself. That is the mountain, in a sense, and the tower and the rain. And then in the Christian setting, it gets into the Lamb of God, and that being able to make for the reason can help solve things and these kinds of things. So let's see if I can find something along the lines of here's Psalms, and these are basically with regards to the Lord, and that's also matters of authority. Daniel. And so Malachi ends with, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. To follow the line, to hold true. Now, it's been some time since I've read from cover to cover an edition of the Bible. It is something to do, and it's at several points in one's life. And there was a time, of course, when it was just the only book around, so that was all there was to it. So taking a brief look then to Genesis 1:1, so beginning kind of at the actual beginning. So for linear thinkers, it's a little bit simpler to figure out. In the King James Version, it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and the darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And then there was light. And it was good. And then there was the division. So this reflects on the idea of that a reasoning agent does this. And so when it can't be really given to somebody who's trying to understand the fundamental question of metaphysics, they can still at least begin to attain to like, well, something does it. It's not undone to be arrived at, that it's good. And then he describes the fundament and the firmament, and then bringing into the ideas all the things of the earth and the world. And it introduces Adam and then Eve, and Adam and the serpent, and Eve and the serpent. And then when getting into things like the serpent or the devils, and those basically being according to that, well, if there's a highest power, then they would have to be subservient somehow to it, vis-a-vis something like Manichaeism or the idea of the duality, vis-a-vis versus and these kinds of things. It has that. Here's generally considered a holistic monism, and then for what with regards to otherwise that it's sensible monotheism. And it can also be then excluded things like intercession, or because that would not be humble, or something like that. For example, I reject original sin. I think animals are not bad when they're birthed, including man. And so, that with regards to that, and Calvinism, say, and the Puritans, as they may be, that it can still be arrived at that sort of approach can lead to observance and obeyance of the laws as given, and then also with regards to being good, it's just then so that otherwise something like the ideas of that man is bad or that men are enemies is not necessarily to be arrived at least from this account. And furthermore, when it's said that the Bible has enough in it that you can find somewhere an argument either way, is you kind of have to read the whole thing, and then for any kind of argument, it involves reading the entire thing. See, that's the thorough account of reason. So those are usual things. And then it just talks about growing and stuff like that. And then we get into Noah. So the story of Noah is the story of the flood. And like, for example, the other day I read the Epic of Gilgamesh, and which is old. It's thousands of years BC. And but it has a story of the flood as with regards to that all the cultures around the world, with any kind of historical record, have references to this cataclysm. So usually enough associated also with the possible existence or fate of the Atlantean, transatlantic Bronze Age thing, where the Mesoamericans and the Mesopotamians all the way across have the same scripts and stars and pyramids and these kinds of things. That being prehistorical then, yet archaeological. And so Noah then there's the usual idea of Ham and Shem and Japheth, or the sons of Noah, and then everybody else after that was like, kind of one of those three things. And that also doesn't include that there's different sources of humanity's influence and different things that became what is Homo sapiens today. And so that's, with regards to otherwise, the idea is like, well, everything had to come from the same place. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe arbitrarily so, but then also kind of like cyclic cosmology, it's after a Big Bang model for a steady state model of the universe. There's something like that all these different, what was inbreeding, or with regards to particular sources of events, that all the different kinds of peoples in the world have been scattered and gathered many, many times, at least since prehistory, and long enough for evolution to kind of catch up. As with regards to like mythical and fantastical creatures and the cryptozoological and stuff like that, it's like, the idea is that, there's usually the idea, for example, that dinosaurs didn't inhabit the earth at the same time as people, but there are definitely some large lizards. So. And then it gets like here, for example, is from Micah, and what doth the Lord require? And with regards to usual stories of international issues and then interpersonal issues, and some definitions of what arrive at qualifications and conditions of law, judgment, and then the lessons of Christ, for example, from Peter, first and second epistle general of Peter, helping to express that man can rehabilitate himself. Angels and devils. The Epistle General of John. So in the first epistle, General John starts this: that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled of the word of life. For the life was manifested, and we have seen it, and bear witness, and show upon you that eternal life, which is with the Father, and was manifested in us. That reflecting on the usual idea in the Christianity of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. That which we have seen and heard declare we unto you, that you also may have fellowship with us. And truly our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. So in the Nordic religions, the Norse gods, there's stuff like Thor and Freya and Odin and this mythology, as it's put. And so in the center of that sort of universe, there's this tree, the tree of life. And maybe it's Yggdrasil, Yggdrasil, Yggdrasil. And so it's a continuum, it's a network, it is all the tree of life. And it's like, is the Jupiter's moon Enceladus an icy globe, yet in its center one giant tree? In Norse mythology, Yggdrasil is just this idea of the tree of life. So there's a little squirrel named Ratatosk, and he climbs up and down the tree every day. He brings the messages back and forth. So it's basically the notion of change with regards to something like the earth and the world and the Midgard serpent or something like that as being all the way around it since all this time. Then has that with regards to those kind of influences coming from the same influences that drove the Vedic tradition and became the Vedas and this kind of stuff 6,000 more years ago. Then the idea that was presented was regards to kind of a trinity, because so there's tree of life, and then on top of this tree of life there's an eagle watching it all. So the eagle is kind of like the idea of an I and a self with regards to Atman and Brahman. And so to reflect on the fact then that it's kind of compounded this idea of objectivity and subjectivity, on top of him is another little eagle, a smaller one. So if it's turtles all the way down, it's kind of like eagles all the way up. Is just kind of an idea that this recursion and regression is represented to bring in any kind of overall system of thought and relate it to the same kinds of things. Then the other thing that the father and son distinction reflects is the microcosm and macrocosm, because just like it's reflected that the study of the fundamental question of metaphysics is presented as an example without one having to kind of take it up and bear the burden of it. So also there's examples of the Trinity as for the Son kind of surrounds, but first the idea of that there's embodied in the micro, in our scale, the macro of the super, that's just another sort of aspect of what results in this Trinity. And then as with regards to, for example, why in the Orthodox, as it may be, and the Catholic of the Christian traditions, the Spirit then is also kind of like, and the further surrounds. So that's just something else to get figured out a little bit. But it relates to the technical philosophy, is that by definition it does. And so it need not be necessarily included in the technical philosophy, because these notions of perspective and projection, geometry and motion, it can also be given in the words that have been developed, but that this is well on the surface of facade can be read for what would be true of that as well. That this is like so. Allegorical, often it's put. And with our fellowships, or inter-subjectivity. And these things write we unto you, that your joy may be full. This then is the message which we have heard of him, and declare upon you that it's light, and in him is no darkness at all. So that just means it's all covered. That's the idea of the Spirit. And so in the light was like the knowledge and the wisdom, and the darkness was simply the unknowns. And to these ancient kinds of peoples, the darkness of the world was full of dangers, and compared to also in modern times when we want to be generous and accept and understand that there's sociological aspects of race and skin color and these kinds of things. It's just to be separated, darkness and light, from white and black, say, according to skin color, if only so far as to that they're each good things. And then here is with regards to darkness and light and shadow and light, that they're complementary things. And then here it's just with regards to an absolute idealism, that all this thusly is revealed, and while as yet it's its own mystery itself. Not to say that it's paradoxical, but that it's good. And then just so that the metaphors of like, it says, if we say that we have the fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not the truth. So that could just kind of reverse. So if we say that we have fellowship with him, we lie and walk in darkness and do not the truth. That it's just saying that to be included, it's necessary to follow and not to walk the walk and talk the talk, if it were so. This is the usual idea of talk the talk and walk the walk. And then it gives that Jesus in Christianity is the great Redeemer, the great Absolver and Redeemer. And then to again counter the kind of the Calvinist tradition, it's not that no man is without sin, but that it's not a sin to be a man, is the idea. So yeah, that's what I want to do today with regards to logos, was really just kind of get an idea of the word. So there's the Psalms. And then it gets into, for example, some of the Psalms that are just in matters of prayer. It's like reaching to oneself and to the notion that can be established internally of that if prayer is generally considered, just like meditation can be personal. And so then it's okay to read the Psalms as not necessarily involving intercession, because they can just be as matters of the reserve of meaning and belief in for prayer and stuff like that. They say that make them are like unto them, so is every one that trusteth in them. So yeah, and then I want to take a look briefly, just if I can find Ecclesiastes or something like that. Maybe not. Oh, here it is. So Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Chronicles get long, Kings gets long. It's just all these lines they read out. Numbers. Oh, then there's like the notion of Revelation and the end times and that kind of stuff. With regards to like the Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff like that, they kind of pile some more of those up. The warnings not to transgress something, meaning that Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, or the preacher. Words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? One generation passeth away, another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. All things are full of labor. The thing that hath seen, it is that which shall be. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. So, again, reflecting on the fundamental question of metaphysics. So, there are at least three Judases in the history surrounding the Bible, and story of the Passion of Christ and these kinds of things, and about the first and second revolutions in Jerusalem, about the Israelites and these kinds of things. It's pretty messy, and it's just something that's in question. It was like who the preacher is or something. So in 2:13 or 14 says, the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. Then said I in my heart, as it happened to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And why was I then any more wise? Then I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever, seeing that which now is in the days to come shall all be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man as the fool? Therefore I hated life, because the work which that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool? Yet shall he have rule over all my labor, wherein I have labored, and wherein I have shewed myself wise in the sun? This is also vanity. So it's reflecting on vanity as the vain, because in vain means two things. So vanity is often read as pride in appearance and these kinds of things. Whereas vanity is also the hopeless and the futile. It's in vain. And so when reading about this and what vanity is, it's helping to reflect on. It's just like it's a temporary thing. This life and this earth and this world and us upon it. And he's reflecting some of his existential and nihilism. And he talks about throwing himself into despair. It's because that way he could always look up on things. About vanity and vexation, so that which doesn't work and that which causes suffering of self. For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he giveth travail, to gather and to heap up, that me give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. And then it begins to everything. There's a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up that which is planted. Time to kill and time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up. So it's talking about balance and these kinds of things and cycles vis-a-vis. Let's see if I can find where it kind of ends. And it's because he's talking about his troubles perceived of the pointlessness. And I've seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. So he's saying that it's a necessary commitment to comprehend these kinds of things, to get into the ideas of the fundamental question of metaphysics and these kinds of things. Then he gets into that there's divine judgment, and moreover I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. Said mine heart, the preacher says, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. And then he's talking about that just applying to men and beasts. Wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? So, and then it just kind of is a reflection on existence and nihilism and value and purpose. And so getting then onto these in Ecclesiastes is that besides that part, in the later part, it's a little bit happier. and it gets into Solomon's Song and this kind of stuff. So that's what I wanted to do today, was look at an edition of the Bible a little while, and just kind of help reflect them that in terms of the logos and the fundamental question of metaphysics, that it's intended to be relayed, and so that is necessary. I mean, if there's no other bibliographic relation to cite, that still the same sort of development can come all out of any other sort of development of what would be that kind of thing. All right, then. Well, with some time until the hour, here's where we left off last time. And this is the Hypnerotomachia Polyphili, The Strife of Love in a Dream, by Francesco Colonna. So hundreds of years ago, this guy was a priest or something. Exactly 500 years after its first publication by the great Venetian printing house of Aldus Manutius in 1499, Francesco Colonna's weird erotic allegorical tale, Hypnerotomachia Polyphili, was translated into English and reprinted in full, together with all of its 174 original and enchanting woodcut illustrations. It has been called the first stream of consciousness novel. It is one of the most important documents of Renaissance imagination and fantasy. The author, presumed to be Francesco Colonna, a friar of dubious reputation, was obsessed by architecture, landscape, and costume. It is not going too far to say sexually obsessed, and his woodcuts are a primary source for Renaissance ideas on both buildings and gardens. So, for example, who Polly was fair and triumphant. Here you will see the four celestial triumphs of high thundering Jupiter. Then it tells you in various moods, not crude ones, of the amorous work and the wounds dealt to mortals by Amor. Here's the joyous triumph of Vertumnus and Pomona, and the sacrifice to Priapus with the ass and his monstrous phallus. Here's a great temple which is as perfect as when it was built, with marvelous art, many rites appropriate to it. Another temple eroded in many places and all damaged by age, you will see in these pages. And other things that will please you, the Tartarian realm, innumerable epitaphs, and the abode of Venus' son. All the honors that are paid with the highest reverence by the gods of the seas, the rivers, and other shores together. Meadows, gardens, and Cytherean orchards, a beautiful theater conspicuous in the center, where he triumphs with Cupid's folk. So yeah, these would generally be considered pagans. Meaning, and sometimes also infidels. Where infidels means that those who are not fidelitas, faithful to otherwise the religion and these kinds of things. But that being said, it's also just the sensational. This is just the sensational. Oh, he says, in which is shown that all human things are but a dream, and many other things worthy of knowledge and memory. So that's the usual idea that there's no account of reason or truth, but it's just a very regular Epicurean and sophistic approach. Then just fill it all with distraction and sensation. He's talking about just passing out a sculptor, some architecture, their forms. Pan, a randy creature. Mnemosyne, at the last curtain, so Mnemosyne is memory. And so then the muses were the ideas of these 12 different artistic traditions, and the idea that each one embodied kind of the inspiration of the muses. So for something where man is animal and man is mind, or man is animal and man is machine, and then man is mind, then there's also man is imagination. And so even more so, and who knows, do electric sheep dream, or do sheep dream, and if so, do they count sheep, or these kinds of things, and if so, do they ever imagine things that are not real? outside, otherwise a realm of sensation. And could it be introduced in any other way than textually or by the literary or the allegorical is after that sense. With regards to relations to other things, maybe so. Yes, it's so. Yes, it's so. All the realm of theory is contingent in imagination and theory itself. Abstraction and theory. Nemazine told me affectionately not to worry about anything. So this is just, being in the circuit and orbits of the great theater of things. The labyrinthine orchard. The golden cord. Description of the first triumphs. So he's talking about it. It's like a car review or something like that. So this is pulp and pomp and circumstance and I look to extract something for it beyond the metaphorical. Nature. And that gets into things like the matters of nature and the definition of nature. So just kind of like I think that it's not a sin to be a man or a person or any other feeling or thinking being by itself. And so that there is like the grounds for absolve and redemption and that kind of stuff always. And so that makes sense that it comes from somewhere. And then as with regards to that can be internalized and these kinds of things, and it should. Then for matters of nature is like, well, is nature broken or is it real, or is like some of the 18th, 19th, and 20th century philosophers were like, well, nature is not real, nature is quite real, with regards to like a Gaia or a world hypothesis or something like that. Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within, the first animated movie to be entirely generated by 3D graphics and to be considered to have photorealistic humans in them. Or as that may be. That otherwise, then this is the it's it's a piece of literature and it's a piece of work, but it's not necessarily it's just so relevant here. And I haven't really extracted from it anything that's not just kind of the sophist and the Epicurean, that is not considered really having much going on with it at all. So a few minutes later, Chinese Healing Arts, Internal Kung Fu, edited by William R. Burke. So that the Tao is the way, and the Dao De Ching is the Eightfold Way, or say. And then in traditional and internal Chinese medicine is involved with Qi. And so that's also involved with something like the theory of humors. So for somebody like Galen or the Hippocrates, of the Hippocratic Oath, then there's traditional Chinese medicine or traditional internal medicine. The Taoist and the Taoist, or the Taoist, the Kung Fu, stretches, forms, medicine, forms, yoga-like, with regards to the yogi, and the Kung Fu, and the Shaolin, and the Udon Kung Fu, and these kinds of things. An exercise manual. Plasma dynamics, Clauser, Addison Wesley. A continuum mechanics, with regards to flow and flux, and then also with regards to states of matter and the highly energized and the resonant states. Copyright 1960, printed in the USA. Library card catalog number 59-14744. Upsurge of interest in the science dealing with interaction of deformable conducting materials, particularly conducting fluids in the electromagnetic field. So one of my ideas I'm trying to figure out for an invention, maybe I mentioned it, was the thyrototron. So a thyrotron is like it means a gate or a valve or a door. The thyrotron is like a valve, and so there's vacuum tubes and there's gas discharge tubes. And so the idea of a thyrotron is it's sort of a gas discharge tube, and its gate voltage controls it. So I'm going to make a triode. And so in the days before transistor logic and that sort of solid state approach to switches like MOSFETs or silicon controlled rectifiers or some of the other approaches and technologies that implement switching today. Then there's the thyrotron. And so what the thyrotron does is it gates voltage. And so via very small control voltage or the amount of power, it's possible to gate a very large amount of power. And also that it operates in a very low loss and high efficiency circuit. So as you run power up through it, it doesn't blow up. So thyrotrons are still used today in some applications in power electronics. So the thyrototron is the idea to use an example of a plasma current device, because you have the Faraday effect, and it means that it's the kind of the summation of flow, and then also it kind of comes around the circuit. So it's like it's the integral exists, and then trying to figure out for current and Ampere's law and Faraday's law what that really means and how it actually fits all that into the fields, the finite, near field and far field, all this kind of stuff. So the thyrototron then is the idea is like, well, you just take a disc magnet and then it's you got a DC electrode in that. So the circuit as a plasma arc will run around in a circle. It will make the rotatory motion. Is it otherwise for something like a DC to AC inverter, it's necessary to have something to basically implement rotatory motion, whether that's a mechanical inverter or whether it uses a bunch of silicon controlled rectifiers to just kind of chop it up and end up being this very dirty and noisy sine wave curve compared to something that out of the pure rotatory motion itself makes a pure and smooth sine wave curve. So these are the ideas then that also that both of these mechanical and this digital switching approach have efficiencies, hopefully, but never quite achieving more than 90%, say. So the idea of the thyrototron is that the only moving part is not really a moving part, but it's just a moving plasma because it's just an arc and current. And then you just set that on top of kind of a variac as an auto transformer tapped out on all the way around. And so it will just naturally build after whatever comes in. And then it's kind of undefined how fast that spins around, but just that it does. And then so out of it comes just like a sine wave output. And it's an electrical circuit. And it can't really, after it's figured out how to not have it destroy itself by arcing, which can be accomplished by means of, for example, a mercury vapor arc, and then otherwise with regards to materials, keeping that from destroying itself. Then it can make a power circuit that can achieve arbitrarily high efficiency, and then with regards to getting that back into the shape and the waveform of 60 hertz and 120 volts or something like wall current, or like 400 volts or 400 hertz or something like that. Various industrial settings, the power inverter. This is just an example of how to apply something like plasma theory to make it for it's like, well, it's got no moving parts, but that is another state of matter as far as it's considered with regards to the arc of electricity. That then they don't have one of those yet that I heard of. But if they had, then it would be kind of like so. Then the idea is a bit of a Fourier-style analysis, as after the Bruchla mechanism, Bruchla, can make for how to have it so that then that can also be conditioned to, that's an invention that nobody's invented yet. Well, all right then, gentle readers, have a great day. Today is Logos 2000, 21st century, October 22nd, 2025. A Christian approach. So long.